本周，德国媒体以川普正在导演一部慢动作经济恐怖片为标题，提到在川普的关税政策底下，受重伤的不会只有美国的邻居墨西哥跟加拿大，还有他的宿敌中国而已，就连全世界都可能会是川普关税政策下的受灾户。至于美国，恐怕也难逃于此之殃。
All right, so we're watching the Dow because we know it is involving your money. The market's reacting to new job data following a roller coaster week on Wall Street. And you can see once again at this hour, we're in negative territory. President Trump's swerving trade policies have a lot of investors on edge.
Even with a tariff pause on many goods from Canada and Mexico, uncertainty still looms over industries from agriculture to autos.
Sometimes you'll hear some negative things. It's always from outside countries. America will be very strong.
The Trump tariffs have been causing whiplash for consumers and businesses and Wall Street alike. Those concerns also are fueling speculation of what that would mean to people's grocery prices. President Trump postpones for the second time many tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico, but then suggested he might impose new ones on Canadian lumber and dairy products. This on-again, off-again position on tariffs with Mexico and Canada has caused confusion. It's caused uncertainty. It's caused a lot of questions.
Front pages of the papers today, especially the Wall Street Journal, which is obviously the official voice of the business community. Their headline is "Wary investors play defense and switch to dividend stocks, rattled by the threat of trade restrictions and a slowing economy." Is the lead. Investors are turning to a classic defensive play. And then if you look at the top of business and finance this morning, starting out the week, markets wake up to new reality.
Why? Well, because shares on Wall Street have slumped today, led by the NASDAQ, which plunged by as much as 4% at one point earlier. The sell-off is driven by concerns about the impact of President Trump's trade policies on the US economy. Investors are worried that a trade war could push the economy into some sort of recession. Well, speaking to Fox News on Sunday, President Trump appeared not to rule that out.
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. We're bringing wealth back to America. That's a big thing. And there are always periods of, it takes a little time. It takes a little time.
And now we've got tariffs and the market has been going down.
Well, not much. I mean, in all fairness.
You said, look, we're going to have a disruption, but we're okay with that. Is that what you meant? The stock market going down was the disruption? What other disruption were you alluding to?
Look, what I have to do is build a strong country.
President Trump saying this week he is not paying as much attention to the stock market this time around, and his Treasury Secretary has talked about paying more attention to the 10-year, but nonetheless, it does seem like there is this, as you called it, a game of chicken.
I think this is the week that Donald Trump developed a fully adversarial relationship with markets. And obviously that it relates to the tariffs that went in place on Canada and Mexico. And then we had this jumping around all week. I'll just summarize this. My favorite economic note of the week comes from Capital Economics. They say, Trump tariff push descends into farce. For those keeping score, Trump has now imposed tariffs on Canada and Mexico that almost immediately done a U-turn twice in a single month. And we're just going to get more of this. So who knows where it's headed. We should discuss whether Trump cares about the stock market anymore or not. Maybe he's just saying that because the stock market is performing badly. I mean, we're not having a crash here.
And part of this, you have to understand, is that for a long time, Wall Street didn't believe Donald Trump would follow through on his threat of tariffs. But just last week, we saw those tariffs go into effect on Canada, Mexico and China. Later this week, we're expecting more tariffs on steel and aluminium products. And so Donald Trump is calling their bluff. And he's saying he's willing to tolerate, as he's mentioned in the past in that speech before Congress, a little disturbance. And that has unnerved people wondering, well, what exactly does that mean? How much disturbance is this administration willing to tolerate to achieve its broader ambitions, whether that's rebalancing trade, whether that's deregulation, whether that's following through on tax cuts? That is the big unknown and is the big gamble that this administration is taking.
就像是在玩一场引斗戏法。没有任何一个国家可以猜到，川普真心想对谁施以关税，也没有任何一个国家敢掉以轻心，认为自己可以在这场关税战中安全脱身。 这或许就是川普不愿意选在4月1日让互惠关税制度正式上路的原因，因为这一次他是玩真的，不会再随着股市的波动而改变政策。可是川普应该没有料到，这次的互惠关税会激发出许多人的爱国心。就拿美国最方便的好邻居加拿大来说，不想再当软柿子的心情已经从上至下形成一种风潮。
I watched a hockey game recently, which I saw something I'd never seen before. I saw Canadians booing the national anthem. How real is the upset, with our northern neighbors to the U.S. right now over this?
I've never seen the amount of anger here in Canada towards the United States that I've seen. Never in my life have I seen anything like this. Canadians are obviously very upset by the tariffs that have been imposed. I think a lot of Canadians are wondering, after the government took some action on fentanyl, exactly what the Trump administration wants Canada to do to avoid the tariffs. And what I've seen across the country is Canadians really very angry with the United States in general, with the Trump administration in particular, and really questioning exactly what the Trump administration wants Canada to do and what the country can do to avoid tariffs over the long term and not just have these 30-day pauses.
Turning now to Canada, where the man set to become the country's next prime minister is striking a defiant tone in the face of threats from the US president. Former central banker Mark Carney was elected on Sunday as the Liberal Party's leader and successor to Justin Trudeau. Among the biggest issues he'll face, growing tensions between Canada and its southern neighbour. On Sunday, he slammed the Trump administration's tariff plans and vowed to keep retaliatory tariffs on the US until, quote, the Americans show us respect.
America is not Canada. And Canada never, ever will be part of America in any way, shape, or form. Look, we didn't ask for this fight. We didn't ask for this fight. But Canadians are always ready when someone else drops the gloves. So the Americans, they should make no mistake, in trade as in hockey, Canada will win.
The pause announced Thursday applies to products covered under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement negotiated during the first Trump administration. Imports from Mexico range from building supplies to meat, fruits, and vegetables. The White House says the pause applies to about 38% of goods from Canada. It does not apply to energy imports, which will be taxed at a lower rate of 10%, as well as potash, a key ingredient in fertilizer that U.S. farmers use. Ontario feeds electricity to Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he's slapping a 25% tariff on that power starting Monday in response to President Trump's actions.
That's the last thing I want to do. It's the last thing. But he has to understand that he can't attack our country economically and expect us to roll over.
就在加拿大安大略省省长强硬回击川普总统的关税威胁，宣布要对输往美国的电力征收25%的报复性附加费后，白宫随后表示，3月12日起将对加拿大征收25%的钢铝税，税率跟其他国家一样，而非川普稍早扬言加征的50%关税。安大略省省长福特在与美国商务部长卢特尼克通话时表示，将会撤回对输美电力征收25%的附加费。这是哪一方的胜利？川普总统在测试的也许不单是他国的忍耐度，或许也在测试美国内部可以承受的程度。一如稍早传出的，川普总统要对加拿大的木材和乳制品征收新的关税，原因是川普总统认为加拿大多年来在这方面是剥削美国的，尽管政客们很清楚要将税率一视同仁是有其难度，但是选民并不清楚，也不一定能认同。
Canada has been ripping us off for years on tariffs for lumber and for dairy products. 250%, nobody ever talks about that. 250% tariff which is taking advantage of our farmers. They make it impossible for us to sell lumber or dairy products into Canada.
Economists say tariffs on Canadian lumber will impact home buyers and construction firms across the country and likely increase home prices.
The National Association of Home Builders says even a 25% tariff could increase the cost by $10,000 for a new single-family home. Dennis Woodruff owns a Maryland lumber yard and voted for Trump. He tells our Selena Wang his customers will pay the price.
I still support him. It's just going to be something all consumers have to pay for. It'll probably cut my sales down.
Our bourbon, our whiskey, our American spirits are taxed so high in Canada, they're pocketing all of that.
Before all of this?
Before all of this. Before the tariffs. So Uncle Nearest, once we crossed that border, the bottle price was almost 100% more. So we're almost double in Canada. So the unfortunate thing with Canada making this decision to make us the retaliatory.
Yeah.
So how complicated is this between two major trading partners?
It's complicated in the sense that so many Americans and Canadians don't even really think about it because the two economies are so integrated. We're standing outside a grocery store here in Toronto where we've been talking to Canadians who say they are now actively going into the aisles and trying to find Canadian-only goods or products that were produced or grown here in Canada primarily. One guy walked out of the supermarket nearly in tears. He was so frustrated about this. He says, look, if we got a recipe at home that calls for jalapenos and the only jalapenos on sale are coming from California, forget it. We're cooking something else. It's that bad. It makes us that angry. And this is the only way we feel that we can somehow protest what it is that President Trump has put in place by exercising how we spend the money in our pocketbooks. So, and for Americans, you're going to see potential increases later this year if the tariffs kick in on lumber, on fertilizer, on produce that comes from Canada, blueberries, tomatoes, lettuce, for example, on steel. Yes, auto parts and vehicles that you might be considering buying.
This is the latest reversal after yet another chaotic day full of threats and retaliation. President Trump agreed to halt the doubling of all Canadian steel and aluminum tariffs from 50% down to 25% after Ontario Premier Doug Ford agreed to suspend a surcharge on electricity into 3 northern U.S. border states. Now, Ford explained why he did this. He issued a statement saying he agreed to it after Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick agreed to meet with him later this week at the White House, where the two will apparently discuss tariffs and renewing the trilateral USMCA or NAFTA 2.0, even though I should note premiers don't negotiate federal treaties. So while this may seem like a de-escalation of sorts in this on-again, off-again trade war, from the White House perspective, it's a win. They say, look, they've stopped being taxed on imported energy, but they're still hitting Canadian steel and aluminum with 25% tariffs starting tomorrow.
因为经济体系是如此高度的融合在一起，很多人认为美加墨的关系就是一种唇齿相依的关系，但更多时候是一种海葵跟小丑鱼共生互利的关系。而在川普全球互惠关税制度正式上路前，各方更关注的焦点其实是美国的经济是否正在走向衰退。然而，从各种数据来看，川普还有本钱继续坚持他要走的路线。
The bogeyman is back. I'm talking about recession. We spent most of 2023 worrying about it. Thankfully, most countries escaped unscathed. But those fears are back again. This time, the warning is for the U.S. economy. Major banks have been studying the U.S. markets, and their models are blinking red.
Lester, it was the worst day for stocks this year. It's been quite a roller coaster ride, with the S&P 500 losing over 7% since President Trump's first full day in office. The sell-off accelerated as the White House escalated its trade war with Canada, Mexico, and China over recent weeks, underscoring investors' concern about tariffs dragging down the U.S. economy. The brutal day on Wall Street not aided by the president's remarks over the weekend, in which he declined to rule out a recession as a possible side effect of his tariff negotiations. Although it's worth pointing out that the U.S. economy is not showing signs of a recession at the moment, with unemployment still near multi-decade lows.
And so I sort of put this two together of today was a pretty good number. We're slowing down slightly, but it's really going to be these next couple of months where we see have companies change their minds with tariffs, with consumer spending pullback, with that sentiment just having a lot of anxiety in the ethos. So I guess the tea leaves are we're okay, but there's some anxiety about where we may be going, Reed.
Is America heading towards a recession? If it is, we should all be worried. A recession in the US will affect all of us, wherever in the world we are. The US makes up around 24% of the global GDP. It is also the second biggest trader in the global market, only behind China. So if the US enters recession, it would send shockwaves across the world. Thankfully, it looks unlikely because the fundamentals remain strong. For example, job creation. The US added 150,000 jobs in the month of February, 150,000 jobs. That is not the sign of impending recession. As for consumer spending, January was a particularly bad month. You had snowstorms and wildfires in America. Such events tend to reduce spending. So most experts also agree that a recession is unlikely. Having said that, the economy could still slow down. A recession is when the GDP contracts for 2 quarters, meaning when the growth is negative for 2 quarters. The US may avoid that disastrous scenario, but their growth could lose momentum. Look at this projection from Morgan Stanley. They expected the US to grow by 1.9% in 2025. Now that's been cut to 1.5%. Next year's forecast has also been cut from 1.3% to 1.2%. Their main reason is the tariff concern. So simply put, it is all up to Donald Trump, really. If he continues these trade wars, everyone will suffer, not just America, everyone. If the president realizes that, we can avoid a disaster. If not, nothing is off the table.